Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Home Services Playbook podcast for home service aspiring entrepreneurs, home service owners, people that want to get into the business. I'm really excited. Got a great guest, Scott Satell, on with us. And, Scott and I were just chatting before we started recording, and he was talking about his mission, which is to building better lives through business ownership. I thought that's such a great way of looking at what, really what Scott does in the day to day. Scott's a franchise consultant and advisor, very successful. He got into the space after a already successful career prior, and he's leveraging his background, which we're going to get into, to help people like the listeners here that maybe want to own a business or currently own a business that want to expand. And so, Scott, I wanted to welcome you to the show.
Thanks, Dan. I'm excited to be here. I think I told you when we first met that I've been listening to your podcast for a while, and I was a franchisee. I'm still a franchisee, and when I came into the franchise space, I really tried to soak up as much information as I could. Started listening to the podcasts, and I fired my boss. Really caught my eye, and it's been one that I listen to all the time. So it's great to be here.
Oh, I appreciate that. Yeah, it's I started doing podcasts in my in my house about 2 years ago, actually 2 years ago to the T almost. And we started with the podcast used to be called Franchise Founders, and we changed it to I Fired My Boss. And I put out podcasts for months and thought, what am I doing? I'm wasting my time. And then started seeing traction. And so now, I'm branching into also home services with the Home Services CEO podcast. So we've got two pieces of content going out, two different podcasts, and the audiences are mixing together, which is pretty cool. So glad that you listen and excited to do this. So I guess to start, Scott, if you don't mind, maybe just for our listeners, if you could just share kind of your career start to finish. How did you get to where you are today?
Yeah, so it's been kind of a long and interesting road. I started out when I was a kid. I was selling cookware door to door, and I really got a great love of selling from doing that, and also realized what a grind it can be, and how to deal with customers, how important customer service is. And then I went to law school, always thinking that I would eventually get into entrepreneurship. And went to law school. I became an attorney representing companies. I worked for a very entrepreneurial firm in Florida. But when the opportunity to come up, my family was in the toy business, my stepfather, and Toys R Us expanded into Europe. And I had the opportunity to start that business representing U.S. companies in Europe. We were manufacturers' representatives. And I did that. I lived in London for 3 years, in Belgium for a little over 2 years, and really learned the business that way, representing these companies at Toys R Us. And then when I moved back, I still dealt with some of the international, but mainly with the U.S. Toys R Us. And that was a great business until Toys R Us went out of business. So I got into the outdoor products business for a while. And even though I was an independent, had my own business, I still had dependencies. At the time I was in the toy business, I was dependent on Toys R Us. In the time I was in the outdoor business, I had one client and lots of customers, so I was dependent on that client. And I could see the ownership of that business changing. They got bought by private equity, and private equity doesn't necessarily reward people working in the business for a while. So I started looking at franchising. I got contacted by a franchise consultant, and he was actually really good. I worked with him, and I got into franchising, and it became kind of a passion for me.
That's excellent. It's an interesting background, your kind of journey to where you are. So law background into business, into like large corporate. You watched in the toy business, I assume a boom, and then obviously a change in that company. And then talk. So what has been like the biggest lesson you've learned as a franchise owner? Like if someone said to you, "What's the one thing you didn't know prior to owning a franchise, what would you say that biggest lesson is?
Yeah, I think that probably just how important your people are. And I did know that, but I didn't have as many employees before. They were more professional people. And I've been very fortunate in my franchise that I have great people there. And a lot of that was luck. Some of it, I think, is the way we trained them and developed them and the way we treated them. But, my business, I'm not in the home services space. I'm in boutique fitness. And so big investment there. My equipment's very expensive. I pay rent. But the truth is, what makes the biggest difference in the business is the people you have working there. So that's uh, in my own franchise. That's been probably the biggest lesson.
Get the right people in the company.
Yep,
Because you now run those.
the exercise coach.
Now you run those pretty much semi-absentee.
Yes, so I was more involved, even though I had the other career going at the time. I was more involved in the beginning. You really you have to get into the business a bit so you can set the standards, get to know who the people are, get to know your clients a little bit. And but now it's more watching the KPIs every day. When I'm in my office for my consulting business, I can see the CRM all the time. I see where the appointments are. I know if there's an issue. Um, but some of it I've had to learn to back off a little bit because my people are really good at handling issues as they come up. And so I need to stay out of the way and then follow up with them. So, and then of course I'm looking at the KPIs all the time. So, and I like going in. I try to see everybody that works there every day. But that is really because I like to. I don't have to.
Yeah, yeah. No, it's interesting. To me, the idea of semi-absentee business ownership is absolutely something you can do. I do think it gets stretched a bit. Like, I'll give you an example. If someone is a first-time business owner with limited capital in a new franchise system, I think we're putting a lot of the odds against that person being able to run that business semi-absentee. Right? They haven't owned a business yet. They haven't done that. They don't have the capital maybe to the level they need, where the franchisor is just not a proven model yet. I think that's a disaster recipe. Now, in a different case, where someone's seasoned, or they start out in the business, or the franchisor is seasoned, right? Or they have capital. There's a lot of factors, but I just think it's interesting in franchising. Everyone uses this term semi-absentee as a blanket statement. Like, I'll give you an example. People say to me, Dan, is Voda semi-absentee? And I'll say, are you semi-absentee? Are you able to run a business semi-absentee? That's not on me. We got a lot of systems, but you've got to have the management chops.
Right. And first of all, you've got to have the capital to invest in a manager. It's not going to run on autopilot. My fitness studio runs well because the person I have that's the manager is really good. And when he started with me, I could see the potential. He started just as a worker, but he had to be developed. And now he's excellent. And in fact, sometimes I usually work Saturdays. At the beginning, I did it because I was having trouble filling that spot. But now I do it because I want to stay in touch with the business. So, but there are times on Saturdays when I text him and have to ask him a question because he actually runs the ongoing parts of the business, the operational parts of the business better than I do.
There's this fine line, right, between being involved and getting in the way, but also
Yes.
being engaged. It's an art. I think it's an art more than a science.
Yeah, for sure. Like just this morning, uh, a potential lead came through, and he was responding, and I started responding at the same time from my office. And fortunately, I caught it before I hit send because otherwise the lead would have gotten two different texts at the same time from the same company. It would have been strange, but yeah. So and that is a reminder to me. Yeah, you've got to back off a little bit.
Yeah, that's an example of like one person accountable to one thing, or no one's accountable, right, for the leads. I know for me, like it's funny, Scott. I try to stay out of things, and sometimes I start poking around. And as the owner of a business, you sometimes don't know where your place is, but your team knows that you have a value, right? And you don't have to prove that to them or to yourself, right? Like you're the owner. That's a job in itself. Um, and, I always try to remind my leadership team that if you're in the room and you're in the seat you're in, you don't have to prove that to anyone, right? Like it's even in a perfect world, you hire people better at things than you, and you don't have to have an ego. It's
Yeah, exactly. You don't have to justify your existence.
yeah,
Which,
exactly, right. And you don't. You,
if you've been in the corporate world and you've been in enough meetings, there are guys that are just talking to justify their existence without anything really to say. And that can be very transparent. And you just, there's no reason to do that when you own the business.
yeah, yeah. And your employees they don't care if you work hard or don't work hard. Like that's irrelevant to their role in the business. And it doesn't, even if you do work hard, now you're just getting in the way. It's interesting.
Right. And the other thing, the number one thing for me is how do my employees treat the clients? And my job is to treat the employees the way I want the clients treated. So, if I take care of my employees, they're going to take care of the clients. And that's kind of the way I think about it. And they all know that. I really think that they realize that I care about them and their future. And, we have a young person that just graduated college and she's starting a little business on the side. And I sat her down and kind of went through the economics of our business. Now, most people would say, don't show your employee the economics. But, she works in our studio and I want it to be a really good experience for her. She's not going to stay there forever. I'd love it if she did, but I want her to get as much out of it as possible. So we go through things like that.
Yeah, and building a relationship. So switching gears, what kind of brands are you showing often? Like what? How do you kind of determine? Less so, how do you determine what the right brand for your candidate is, but like how do you pick brands that you think are going to be the next big business in the different spaces?
Yeah, so everything is not always swinging for the fences. You not to overuse sports analogy, but the companies that are doing the blocking and the tackling, you're not always going to hit a home run. You know, there are solid businesses, and a lot of my business, actually most of my business, does center on the home services business because they just makes for most of my clients they make so much sense. I was working with a client a couple of months ago, and he's in the food business. He's a food broker. And so we started talking about, he actually eats lunch at the place I usually eat lunch at. And so we got in a conversation about what I did. And he said, I might be interested in that. He says, obviously, I'd want to use my experience in the food business to get into, some type of food franchise. And we talked about it, and I asked him, if he likes having a lot of minimum wage employees and so forth. And after a couple of minutes, he was pretty certain he didn't want to be in the food business. And then we started talking about home services, and there's a lot of things that about home services that are really appealing to my candidates. And, the first thing is generally there's a low cost of entry. There's very little overhead. A lot of them you can either work out of your house or a small class B office space in a corporate center or something like that. Not a retail environment like a boutique fitness or a fast food where you pay much higher rents. And then, they're a lot of the home services brands bring in, big revenues. So, you have the high ticket items like restoration services, window coverings, fencing. A lot of our fencing franchises, they're typically installing a fence is a $5,000 to $7,000 ticket. So, you can ramp up pretty quickly there. Same thing with remodeling, garage doors, you name it. And then there's others with recurring revenue, like pool cleaning, the cleaning franchises, house cleaning, window cleaning, all the things that people are looking for. So, there's such a great return on an investment in the home services space.
Yeah, it's interesting when you really think about like cash on cash return. No one really talks about that enough in franchising, right? Like if you buy a home service business for $200,000 and you put down, I don't know, $50,000, right? And you got a loan for the rest, or put down $100,000. Whatever you're making back in profit is a return on your cash, right? Not the total investment. And it's so often so strong, like as far as home service sales and profit margins.
Exactly. And then the other thing is it's so much easier to scale. If I want to open multiple fitness studios, and I'm not bad mouthing fitness, like I love my fitness studio, but if I want to open, 3 fitness studios, it's basically 3 times the cost of opening one. Maybe a little less. You can share some employees and so forth. But when you try to scale a home services franchise, you're not doubling and tripling the cost, but you are doubling and tripling the revenue, and oftentimes even doing even better with the profit.
Yeah, I always say it's easier to run a big business than it is to run a smaller. Like I'd rather have 3 units of a franchise than one, because you have a GM you can utilize and use economy of scale to pay them a bit more per territory, but not a full salary per territory.
Exactly. And if things are a little slow in one of the territories and they're strong in the other, you can balance out the employees and so forth. So I find home services the easiest of all our categories that we deal with, the easiest to scale. And then you can also scale vertically. Once you're in people's homes, if you're doing window coverings or something like that, then you'll have this customer base, and maybe after you get a few territories there, next you get into another product and you scale that. So it's really easy to build a big business through the home services space than anything else we have in franchising.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Well, what do the only thing I'd say about home services that I think is important is, you know, it, it it's a sales driven business. Like you definitely need a salesperson or an owner being a salesperson out there. What are you seeing kind of your franchise candidates doing there? Are they typically doing the sales? Are they hiring the sales? Like what are you seeing works best?
Yeah, most of them do the sales. That's going to be their contribution, especially at the beginning. Then they after they get the business going, then they can hire somebody else to do the sales. But my people, if they buy a painting franchise, they're not walking around with a can of paint and a paintbrush. They're the people that we put into restoration services are not necessarily the ones going in and doing the remediation and so forth. That's what they hire, but their part in getting the business started is the sales end of it. Now, some of them hire somebody to handle that right from the beginning, but it's easier to get to profitability if you're handling the sales end of it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting, Scott. Like for us, we're big. Like we have lots of franchise owners that have jobs as well. Like they're doing both as an additional or another business, right? If they have another business. And I always explain that, there's a difference between selling and prospecting, right? And so, at Voda, for example, we do all the lead gen, all the paid media, the Google, the Facebook, the, pay per click, SEO, direct mail. We have a call center answering the phones and booking jobs. But with that said, nothing's ever going to replace local selling in any business. If we didn't need local selling, then I'd open corporate stores, right? We need a local owner that people know, like, and trust, that want to give them the business and they want to work for that owner. Um, and so we definitely need what we call a vote of the mayor of the town, right? That person that's out there being in the community. But what I always tell owners that are keeping a job is, we actually won't really allow them. We want them to buy the business and then, you know, I don't want to say promise, but pretty much understand that they need to hire a salesperson because if they're not going to go out there and sell. Now, I've got plenty of owners that that's what they're doing, but I always remind them there's a difference between selling and prospecting. Selling means talking to people that are in front of you. Prospecting means going out there and finding people, and that's a job in itself sometimes. You know,
Yeah,
um,
yeah, absolutely. Like I see more and more of our franchisors are, they have the call center, they're providing the leads, they do the lead generation through Facebook or whatever their strategy is. But at the end of the day, somebody has to sell that person. That lead generation is great at getting people not necessarily in the door, but close to the door. And then, the franchisee, the business owner, is the one that has to either hire somebody or do themselves, get them you know, to be a customer or a client or whatever. So, and when we talk to candidates, like the guys that have sales experience are usually the best candidates.
well, yeah, I know for us, like we started to. That's why we say the mayor of the town because we started to say we only want. I want to build a company of salespeople. I'm not saying salespeople that don't have a management ability, professional salespeople, someone like yourself or myself that, enjoys a people person. They love being around people. They love influencing people. When we say the mayor of the town, we mean, it's the guy or gal that is the president of the HOA in their community, even though there is no president, right? They're the self-elected HOA president. They're someone that likes to influence. And, that in me, like when I was growing up, I played baseball. And I think back to the guy that sponsored our team's jerseys. We owned a contracting business. He always had the orange slices at the end of the game. Parents loved him, kids loved, the family knew them. And that was who was getting all the business, was the person ingrained in the community.
Absolutely. And that's, you know, actually, when I thought about getting into franchising, I had always wanted to have a community business, an ice cream shop, a gym, something where people gathered, where they came around. And until I started talking to a franchise consultant, I didn't know how to go about doing it. I didn't know about Rob's rollovers, that I could utilize my IRAs and 401k to, provide some seed money to start the business. And, once I started talking to this consultant, it opened up a whole new world to me. And that, was really exciting. And I love I've heard you mention the mayor of the town, that's the guy that you're after in at Voda, and I love that expression.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, it kind of cuts through the noise, right? Because it's like, well, who that's who we want, and so we've been really intentional around if someone is in the mayor of the town, not allowing them through our process because we're doing a disservice to them and to us, right? If they buy a franchise and that's not them. Now, I'm not saying there are people that are great operators who can hire salespeople. That's fine, but you got to have that mayor of the town in the community. Um, so kind of just trying to understand better, walk me through your process. Like when someone reaches out to you, Scott, to learn about owning a franchise business, how does it work? Like, what does that process look like?
So the first thing we do is we'll have an introductory call, and that'll last about 15 to 20 minutes, where we just get to know him a little bit, tell him a little bit about our process, how we handle it, that, explain to him a little bit about the franchising space, and then what my place is in the franchising space, which, as you mentioned, I'm a consultant. I'm part of my company's called Thrive Franchise Search Firm, but we're part of the franchise network, which, to me was the elite network in franchising. And So I explained that to him. I explained that we deal with a lot of franchises, but it's limited. There's over 4,000 franchises out there, and there are many of them I wouldn't want to work with for whatever reason. And so it's important to be with a network that does a good job of vetting the franchises and so forth. So that's call one. Then we send them a questionnaire and find out a little bit about their finances, what they can do, and some other like what their motivations are and so forth. When I get that back, then we have a long call. We call it a consultation. And that lasts anywhere from 60 to 90 minutes, where I really dive in and find out everything about this candidate that I can find out. What's his motivations? What's he trying to accomplish? How much time does he have to work in the business? Even some of the questions you were asking me earlier about, what's his sales background and so forth. So I really get to know the person. I talk to him about different categories, measure, his interest in the different categories. And then, I may ask him a couple of provocative questions to really challenge some of his assumptions. I talk to him from the very get-go about, not coming in with assumptions, that you've got to come in with a clean slate. And also talk to him about the fear and anxiety that is part of the process, that, often in the beginning of the process, everybody's exuberant, enthusiastic, and then when they get close to decision time, the fear settles in, and that I prepare them for that and ask them to talk to me about it when it comes in. So that's our consultation. Then from the consultation, I sit down and I make a model, which I send to the candidate, basically telling them back what they told me and what I think it means. And I send them that model. And then from the model, I match them to franchises. And then we have our franchise reveal meeting, the next one. And I go in depth in a few franchises that I feel are excellent fits for them. And once that call is finished and they've decided that they want to go into a further investigation with these three, we never leave that call with more than three franchises, but they, up to three franchises, I'll introduce them to the development people at each one, and then the process starts. So, and then through the process, we're with them, every step of the way. I'll have weekly calls, or sometimes even more often, as they're going through the process to see how they're finding everything. Are they getting their questions answered? I may suggest questions, and so forth. And so usually it's a 3 or 4 month process, sometimes a little faster, but we end up with them being a business owner.
That's excellent. Yeah, it sounds like you're involved every step of the way, coaching, mentoring, maybe give it a little bit of therapy sometimes if they're getting nervous toward the end. I've never had anyone, I've sold a lot of franchises in my 10 years in franchising. I've never had anyone not get nervous at the end. I'll tell you, when people come to our discovery day, I think I told you last time we talked, we explain to them the fear they're going to face, and we ask them for their permission if there's no pressure from us, but if they do decide to move forward, we ask them for the permission to push them, because there's never a person in my life other than, maybe someone that was like a sociopath that didn't feel nervous about investing
Yes.
their life, potentially their life savings into a franchise. You should feel nervous. That is a good thing and a normal thing before you sign. But just because you feel nervous, that doesn't mean it's your gut telling you not to do it. I'm a big believer in this, Scott. If you feel it in your chest, it's fear. If you feel it in your gut, it's intuition. You have to learn which one that is. But I'm sure a lot of your people get nervous right before they sign.
They sure do. And it's just, talking them off the ledge often. And, is it a logical fear, or is it, an illogical fear, just emotion? And, once we kind of talk them through it, we get them back to, okay, let's try to remember why you're doing this. Is that still important to you? Is this the best way to go about achieving that goal? And we usually can get them back on track.
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate you jumping on here onto this podcast. If someone wanted to get in touch with you, Scott, how would they do that?
The best way is to go onto the either to go onto the franchise website and go to the consultants page and come to me, Scott Satell, Satell, or you can call me or text me at 610-246-0190.
Awesome. Well, thanks again for joining, and thank you everyone for giving us a listen.
Yeah, great. Thank you very much.